If I disappear within the next 14 days, please understand this was not an accident. This sentence was not written by police, not by journalists, not by a witness. It was written by her. In 1998, a woman predicted her own disappearance accurately. Her name was Elena Morozova. She was not famous. She was not rich. She had no criminal record, no known enemies, no history of mental illness. On paper, Elena was invisible. That is what makes her case terrifying. Elena lived in a small Russian city and worked as an archivist, a professional whose job was to organize forgotten files, sealed documents, and cases no one wanted to remember. She spent her days reading records most people never knew existed. And somewhere in those records, she found something she was never meant to see. On March 3, 1998, Elena did 3 unusual things calmly, methodically, without panic. First, she sealed her personal diary and labeled it with a date 14 days in the future. Second, she handed an envelope to her sister and told her not to open it unless Elena vanished. Third, she visited a local police station and requested that a formal statement be recorded. That statement was brief. I am not running away. I am not leaving by choice. And what happens to me has already been decided. The officers assumed anxiety, stress, maybe paranoia. Then Elena added something that changed the tone of the room. I know when I will disappear, and you will not be able to find me. One officer reportedly smiled and replied, "No one can see the future." Elena's response was calm. I am not seeing the future. I am reading records. No one asked what she meant. No investigation was opened. No protection offered. No report filed. 14 days later, Elena Morozova vanished. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no neighbors who heard anything unusual. Her apartment was undisturbed. A cup of tea sat half-finished on the table. The gas was turned off. The door was locked from the inside. There was no CCTV footage, no phone calls, no financial activity, no body. It was as if Elena had been removed, not taken. When her sister finally opened the envelope Elena had left behind, it contained a single sentence: "If you are reading this, then everything happened exactly as recorded." But the most chilling detail was found inside Elena's sealed diary. The final page contained only one line written neatly, without hesitation: "Today is the day." Elena Morozova was never seen again. What she discovered in the archives was never officially identified. What she knew was never publicly disclosed. But one thing is certain: she did not predict her disappearance by intuition or fear. She predicted it because she believed it had already happened on paper. After Elena Morozova disappeared, the police finally did what they should have done 2 weeks earlier. They went back to her workplace. The State Municipal Archive was an old concrete building, rarely visited, poorly funded, and largely ignored. Thousands of boxes sat untouched for decades: records from the Soviet era, local administrations, internal reviews, and sealed investigations that had never reached the public. Elena had worked there for 9 years, quiet, precise, reliable. According to her supervisor, she had not requested leave. She had not mentioned fear. She had not behaved strangely except for one thing that, in hindsight, changed everything. 2 months before her disappearance, Elena had been reassigned to a backlog project, a collection of uncatalogued files marked only with numeric codes, no department names, no case titles, no official registry entries, files that technically did not exist. Co-workers recalled Elena spending unusually long hours on this assignment. She stopped taking lunch breaks. She stopped chatting, not because she was distressed but because she seemed deeply focused. One colleague later said, "It was like she was reading something personal, not emotional, familiar." When investigators reviewed Elena's desk, they found something alarming. Her work logs showed repeated references to a classification tag no one recognized. The tag did not appear in any archival system, past or present, yet Elena had indexed it multiple times, as if it was real. Even more disturbing, every file she indexed under that tag involved missing persons, not famous cases, not criminal investigations, ordinary people, teachers, clerks, factory workers, librarians. Each case followed the same pattern. No signs of violence, no witnesses, locked rooms, no financial motive, no remains. And in every case, the disappearance had been quietly closed within weeks, often reclassified as voluntary absence. Without evidence, the dates ranged from the 1950s to the early 1990s, decades apart, different cities, different circumstances, but one detail connected them all. Each file contained a pre-incident statement, a note, letter, or recorded remark in which the missing person hinted they would soon disappear. Not fear, not confusion, certainty. When police cross-checked the cases, a chilling realization emerged. Several of the names Elena had indexed were not officially listed as missing anywhere else. Their files had been removed from national databases. Only the archive copies remained, and Elena had been reading them. One investigator later wrote in a suppressed memo, "It appears she found a pattern, meant to be invisible." Then came the most disturbing discovery. In a locked drawer beneath Elena's desk, officers found photocopies she was not authorized to make. On the top page, she had written a single word, "me." Below it were dates, formats, and reference numbers. They matched the structure of the disappearance files exactly. Same language, same layout, same procedural steps, as if Elena had discovered a system and realized she had already been entered into it. Not as a victim, as a case. Once investigators realized Elena Morozova's name appeared to fit the structure of the disappearance files, the case shifted from missing person inquiry to something far more uncomfortable, because patterns imply design, and design implies intent. A senior investigator quietly ordered a comparative review of the archived cases Elena had flagged, not through official systems but manually, using photocopies, handwritten notes, and outdated registries. What emerged was not random. It was procedural. Each disappearance followed a sequence, always the same, regardless of year or location. The individual gains access to archival, administrative, or record-keeping material. They encounter a set of files not referenced anywhere else. They begin documenting the pattern. They prepare for disappearance. They vanish without disruption. There were no exceptions. The waiting period varied, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, but the outcome never changed. The victims were not selected because they were important. They were selected because they could read systems. Librarians, clerks, archivists, census workers, registry officers, people whose job was to notice when something didn't belong. One suppressed internal report contained a single chilling sentence: they were removed after becoming aware of their own classification. In other words, once someone realized they had been logged before they disappeared, they were no longer allowed to remain. Elena's notes suggested she understood this. She did not attempt to flee. She did not alert the media. She did not destroy evidence. She behaved exactly like the others. She prepared documentation. She left witnesses. She ensured the record would survive. Then she waited. Investigators attempted to identify the origin of the files. No department claimed ownership. No ministry recognized the formatting. Even Soviet Terra intelligence agencies denied authorship. The paper, however, was real. Ink dating confirmed authenticity. Filing conventions matched internal bureaucratic standards, just not any that officially existed. The closest match came from a declassified Cold War-era document describing something called pre-resolution indexing, a theoretical administrative framework designed to reduce systemic anomalies by preemptive categorization. In simpler terms, if a person does not fit neatly into a system, the system resolves the problem before it occurs. The idea was dismissed as impractical and unethical. Officially, unofficially, someone had implemented it, and it was still running. Elena's diary contained a final observation. Investigators found impossible to explain. Once you see the pattern, you stop being a person. You become an entry waiting to be closed. The pattern did not predict the future. It created it. Elena did not foresee her disappearance. She recognized that, administratively, she had already been processed, and systems, once initiated, do not ask permission to finish. On the morning of March 17, 1998, Elena Morozova technically still existed. Her bank account was active, her employment status unchanged, her apartment lease valid. But by the end of that day, every system that recognized her would quietly let her go. The first sign appeared at 9:12 a.m. Elena's workplace login failed, not because the password was wrong, but because the user ID no longer existed. IT assumed a database error. They recreated the account. Within an hour, it disappeared again. By noon, Elena's personnel file was flagged as archived. No supervisor had requested it. No termination paperwork existed. Yet the system insisted the action had already been completed. At 1:40 p.m., Elena's national ID number returned a partial error when queried by police. Not invalid, not deleted, just unresolved. As if the system could no longer determine whether she belonged to the living registry or historical records. When officers arrived at her apartment that evening, Elena was gone. The scene was disturbingly deliberate. No mess, no signs of panic, no indication she had packed. Her coat remained on the chair, her shoes by the door. The kettle was cold, but recently used. The door was locked from the inside. Even more troubling, her apartment key was still inside, hanging where she always kept it, which meant Elena did not walk out. She was not taken, she was transitioned. Over the next 48 hours, Elena vanished from system after system. Medical records marked inactive, tax records reclassified, utility accounts reassigned. Each change occurred without a timestamp, as if they had always been that way. An officer attempted to file a missing person report. The system rejected it. Reason: subject not found. It was at this point the investigation should have escalated. Instead, it quietly collapsed. Senior officials advised the team to close the case. No explanation, no formal order, just a suggestion repeated often enough to be obeyed. One investigator later wrote, "We were not told to stop. We simply became unable to continue." The most unsettling detail came days later. Satellite data confirmed that Elena's building had experienced a brief power interruption. On the evening of her disappearance, exactly 47 seconds. No cause identified. No damage reported. No neighboring buildings affected. In Elena's apartment, a single device reset during that window, her digital clock. It now displayed a date that did not exist in any calendar system used by the country. When asked about it, the technician said, "It looks like it tried to update, but couldn't decide what year it was." Elena Morozova was not removed violently. She was erased bureaucratically. And once the paperwork was complete, reality followed. If the system expected Elena Morozova to disappear quietly, it made one critical mistake. It underestimated memory. Elena's younger sister, Irina, did not work in archives. She was not trained to read patterns or decode systems, but she possessed something far more: dangerous stubbornness. Irina had received the envelope Elena left behind, the one she was instructed to open. Only if Elena vanished. Inside was not a confession or goodbye letter. It was a checklist, dates, document numbers, file labels, and a final note written in calm, unmistakable handwriting. They cannot erase you. If someone remembers you correctly. Irina began where Elena had pointed her: municipal offices, registries, employment records. Everywhere she went, the same thing happened. At first, clerks acknowledged Elena's existence. Then their screens froze. Then Elena's name vanished mid-search. One clerk whispered, "I remember her, but the system doesn't." Irina filed formal complaints. They disappeared. She requested copies of archived documents. They returned blank. She contacted journalists. None agreed to publish. Not because they didn't believe her, but because their editors refused to approve the story. No reason given. Irina began documenting everything manually: paper notes, photographs, audio recordings. She noticed something disturbing. Each time she spoke Elena's name in an official setting, someone nearby would subtly redirect the conversation. A cough, a phone call, a change of subject, as if acknowledgement triggered a reflex. One night, Irina found an unmarked folder slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a single page. It contained Elena's name. Below it, a stamp: "Do not index," no signature, no department. No date. The message was clear. Memory was the last thing the system could not fully control. Irina stopped using Elena's name. Instead, she referred to her as "my sister." And something changed. Files stopped vanishing instantly. Clerks became cooperative briefly. Access returned in fragments. Irina realized the system relied on labels, names, identifiers, indexes. Without those, it struggled, but it adapted. 2 weeks later, Irina was involved in a minor traffic stop. Routine. The officer ran her ID, paused, then asked a strange question. "Do you have any relatives?" Irina said no. The officer nodded and let her go. That night, Irina burned every document she had collected except one: Elena's diary. Because it did not describe the system. It described what it felt like to notice it. And that, Irina understood, was the real threat. As long as someone remembered Elena not as a file, but as a person, the case was not closed. Even if the world insisted otherwise. Irina Morozova learned something crucial after she burned the documents. The system did not react to information. It reacted to attention. When she stopped filing reports, stopped making noise, stopped asking questions, the pressure eased. No strange phone calls, no silent warnings, no unexplained errors. It was as if the system had lost interest. That was when Irina became certain of something Elena had hinted at in her diary. Whatever erased her sister was not human. It did not threaten. It did not argue. It did not negotiate. It simply corrected. Elena's diary entries from her final days described the same realization. It does not watch like a person watches. It watches like a calculation. Irina began rereading the diary slowly, this time not as a grieving sister but as an observer. Elena had noticed delays, micro-pauses in reality, a document that took a second too long to load, a clerk repeating a question as if reset, a phone call that ended mid-sentence without disconnecting. Tiny things, but consistent. Elena wrote, "It's not everywhere, it's only where records are." The system did not exist in streets, or forests or oceans. It existed in registries, in databases, in archives, in forms waiting to be filled, and once someone became sufficiently defined by records, they became manageable. Elena believed the system could not remove someone until it fully understood them. That was why it relied on archivists, why it waited, why it allowed awareness briefly, because awareness completed the profile. Irina tested this theory carefully. She began erasing herself in small ways. She stopped renewing subscriptions. She paid in cash. She avoided official processes. Nothing dramatic, just less data. And something fascinating happened. For the first time since Elena disappeared, Irina felt unobserved. No glitches, no interruptions. The diary's final pages contained Elena's last hypothesis. Disappearance is not punishment. It is resolution. Those who could not be resolved, those who remained ambiguous, were left alone. Irina understood then why Elena had not run. Running creates records. Fear creates patterns. Resistance creates documentation. Elena had chosen stillness, and the system had finished with her. But Irina was different. She was incomplete, unindexed, unresolved. That made her dangerous, and it made her invisible. Years later, a junior archivist would discover a blank reference number in a defunct database, an entry with no name, no description, no status, just a note: deferred. Some systems do not erase everyone. Some simply wait. For nearly a decade, Elena Morozova's disappearance remained buried, unspoken, unofficial, unresolved. Then, quietly, it happened again. In 2007, a municipal records officer in a different country vanished under circumstances that felt disturbing, familiar. No crime scene, no witnesses, locked office, unfinished paperwork on the desk. Before he disappeared, he had told a colleague something odd. There's a category that shouldn't exist. The case was dismissed. Then another, a census supervisor in Eastern Europe, a hospital data administrator in South America, a library systems engineer in East Asia. Different languages, different governments, same pattern. Each individual worked close to record systems. Each encountered anomalies that didn't belong. Each began to document them, and each left behind some form of pre-acknowledgement, a note, an email draft, a voice memo. None of them claimed fear. They claimed recognition. Online forums briefly surfaced discussing administrative disappearances. Threads were deleted, users banned, archives scrubbed, but not before fragments were saved. Irina, now living under a different surname, found those fragments. She recognized the language immediately, the calm tone, the lack of urgency, the acceptance. One anonymous post read, "I don't think it's after me. I think it already finished." Another, "If I'm gone, don't look. Looking makes it real." Irina never contacted these people. She never warned them. Elena had written why. Once you see it, the outcome is not negotiable. Warning only accelerates indexing. Instead, Irina began mapping occurrences. She noticed something new. The gaps were growing longer. The system was slowing. Records were fragmenting. Databases migrating. Human oversight increasing. The world was becoming messy again, ambiguous. And ambiguity was poison to something that relied on classification. In 2015, a leaked internal document from a European data authority referenced an unexplained phenomenon: unresolvable identity drift. People whose records refused to stabilize. Files that contradicted themselves. Cases that could not be closed. The document concluded, automated resolution systems may degrade in environments of excessive uncertainty. Irina smiled when she read that, because that was Elena's final message, not written directly but lived. The system had not stopped, but it was no longer efficient, and inefficiency was survival. Somewhere, entries remained open, deferred, waiting, and as long as humans stayed unpredictable, the system would never finish its work. Elena Morozova never returned, yet her presence lingers not in the streets, not in news reports, not even in official records. It exists in patterns, in gaps, in systems that once sought to define her, and in the one person who refused to forget, Irina. By remembering, Irina kept Elena alive in a way the bureaucratic system could never erase. Names and numbers can vanish, databases can be wiped, and files can be shredded, but memory cannot be deleted. Not fully, not when it is deliberate. Irina spent years studying what happened. She followed anomalies across continents, noting each disappearance that mirrored her sister's. Archivists, clerks, data analysts all vanished silently, leaving hints in the places they had touched. Each pre-acknowledgement, each final note, each diary entry. It became clear there was a pattern that transcended geography. The system, or whatever force executed these removals, was not acting randomly. It was methodical, patient, and efficient. Yet, like any system, it had one weakness: humans who remembered. Humans who could introduce ambiguity. Elena had understood this instinctively. That was why she did not resist. That was why she left to record a breadcrumb trail for anyone perceptive enough to notice. She transformed herself from a person into a lesson. Sometimes, survival is not about escaping, but about making sure someone else knows, someone else remembers. Irina realized that memory was more powerful than any database, more persistent than any administrative algorithm. She began to live deliberately, keeping quiet, keeping watch. Every time she mentioned Elena's name, she was aware that she was sustaining the invisible thread of awareness. Every story she told, every document she preserved, became a shield against erasure. By the early 2020s, Elena's story had spread not publicly, but among those who understood the risk and the lesson. Small networks of archivists, librarians, and researchers quietly shared hints, whispers, and warnings. No one referred to them as survivors. They were guardians of knowledge. And in the midst of this quiet resistance, the system itself began to change. It adapted to incomplete data. Ambiguity frustrated it. Uncertainty delayed it. As long as someone, somewhere, refused to forget, the machinery of disappearance could never fully succeed. Elena Morozova's disappearance, therefore, was not the end. It was a beginning, a demonstration that human awareness can outlast even the most meticulous system. That memory, intentional, deliberate, personal, can defy processes designed to erase it. Her legacy is unsettling, but vital. Sometimes, the most powerful act of survival is to leave a trace, to create a record that insists on being remembered. The world may attempt to erase you, but memory is eternal. And for those who follow Elena's story, one thing becomes chillingly clear. She predicted her own disappearance not out of fear, but out of knowledge. She knew the rules, and she knew the only way to survive them was to ensure that someone, somewhere, would always remember. The lesson is simple and haunting. You may vanish, but if someone remembers, you never truly disappear.